The silver moonlight didn't feel like a blessing tonight. It felt like a spotlight on my execution. I stood on the sacred dais of the Blood Moon Pack, my breath hitching in the frigid mountain air. Beside me, Logan Huntmiller stood tall, his presence a suffocating weight of cedar and rain. He was the Alpha, the man I had spent 3 years serving as a wolfless Omega, the man who sent matched the soul bond I had kept a desperate secret. Tonight was the great pairing, the night he was supposed to claim his fated mate. The crowd of 1,000 shifted, their eyes cold and expectant. I reached out, my fingers trembling, hoping for the brush of his hand that would signal my salvation. But Logan didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge the girl who had cleaned his boots and mended his battle-worn shirts. Instead, he stepped toward the edge of the stage, his voice booming with a terrifying, heart-crushing finality. "Members of the Blood Moon," Logan roared, his eyes glowing a predatory amber. "Tradition demands a Luna of strength. A Luna with a spirit that matches the Alpha's fire. Therefore I, Logan Huntmiller, reject the bond of the weak. I choose Sienna Starkvaughn to be my Luna and my mate." The silence that followed was a physical blow. Sienna, the daughter of a rival High Alpha, stepped forward with a smirk that tasted of triumph. She wasn't my sister, but she had spent years making my life a living hell. As Logan took her hand, the bond one had carried like a flickering candle was snuffed out. My chest didn't just ache. It felt as though someone had reached inside and turned my heart into jagged glass. Hello to all my wonderful viewers. I am so incredibly happy to have you here for this journey. Before we see the fallout of this ultimate betrayal, I want to ask, where are you tuning in from today? Leave your country or city in the comments. I love seeing how far our pack reaches. How are you all doing? If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and join our channel. Your support means everything to me, and it helps us tell these stories of strength and redemption. I felt the eyes of the pack turn into needles. Laughter rippled through the front rows. Omegas who had once been my friends, now sneering at the girl the Alpha had publicly discarded. I was stripped of my title, my hope, and my dignity in a single breath. Logan looked at me then, his gaze devoid of the warmth I had imagined during those late nights in the pack house. "Leave the dais, Elara," he commanded, his voice a whip. "You are a shadow. You have no place in the sun." I stumbled back, my boots catching on the ancient stone. The humiliation was a cold, rising tide, threatening to drown me. I looked at the crowd, a sea of judgmental faces, and then at the man I had loved, now pressing his lips to Sienna's hand. The world began to blur, the edges of my vision turning a violent, pulsating crimson. But as I reached the edge of the stage, ready to disappear into the woods and let the cold take me, a sound erupted from deep within my marrow. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming that made the very stones of the dais vibrate. My heart, which should have been broken, began to beat with a rhythm that wasn't human. It was ancient. It was primal. A heat hotter than any sun exploded in my veins, turning the blood in my heart into liquid gold. "Elara." Logan's voice faltered, the authority in his tone replaced by a sudden, sharp edge of unease. The air around me began to shimmer. The crowd stopped laughing. The wind died down, replaced by a pressure so immense that the younger wolves in the front row dropped to their knees, whimpering. I turned back toward the center of the stage, but I wasn't the girl who had walked up there. My shadow didn't look like a girl anymore. It grew, stretching across the white stone until it loomed over Logan and Sienna like a nightmare. A low growl, a sound that felt like grinding tectonic plates, tore through the silence. It wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from me. For the first time in 18 years, the wolfless girl felt the fur break through the skin, but it wasn't gray or brown like the others. It was pure, blinding white, tipped with silver that hummed with the power of 1,000 moons. My wolf wasn't a companion, she was a goddess. Logan's face drained of color as he realized the truth. He hadn't just rejected an Omega. He had rejected the first Leakin, a creature of myth that hadn't walked the earth in 5 centuries. As my bones cracked and reshaped, I saw the terror in his eyes, and the realization that the night meant to break me had just become the night I ended his reign forever. The transformation didn't finish in a single explosion of fur and bone. It simmered, a tectonic shift beneath my skin that forced the entire pack to hold its breath. I stood in the transitional space between human and something ancient, my eyes bleeding from a dull, broken brown to a piercing, incandescent silver. To the Blood Moon Pack I was Alara Woodscump, a name I'd carried like a shroud. In a world where your wolf was your worth, I was a zero. My deepest desire had never been for the Alpha's throne or the Pack's riches. It was simply to be seen. Not as the girl who scrubbed the grease from the communal kitchen, but as a woman with a soul worth claiming. I had spent years suppressing the strange humming in my blood, terrified that if I let it out, it would consume the only life I knew. My deepest fear was exactly what had happened tonight, that when the truth was revealed I would be found wanting. I had loved Logan since we were pups, back when he was just a boy with scraped knees and a mischievous grin, before the weight of the alpha mantle turned his heart into a fortress of cold pragmatism. I had stayed by his side through the Great Famine and the Silver Bullet raids, believing that my wolfless state was a trial we were meant to endure together. "Alara, stop this," Logan hissed, though he didn't move. He couldn't. The pressure of my emerging presence was pinning him to the spot. "Whatever trick this is, you're embarrassing the Luna." Sienna Starkvon stepped back, her face twisted in a mask of disgust that couldn't quite hide the flicker of primal terror in her eyes. Sienna was the daughter of the Northern Alpha, a woman raised on silk and the blood of her enemies. She was a perfect alpha mate on paper, strong, fertile, and politically connected. She represented the security Logan thought the Pack needed. Beside her stood her brother, Forrest Gumpvon, a man with a reputation for brutality and a gaze that lingered too long on the weak Omegas. He stepped forward now, his hand going to the silver-tipped dagger at his belt. "She's a freak, Logan," Forrest spat, his voice trembling slightly. "A mutation. Kill it before it taints the ceremony." I looked at Forrest, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to flinch. I felt an icy, distant pity. My wolf, a creature of starlight and ancient hunger, whispered in the back of my mind, not in barks or whines, but in a voice that sounded like a choir of 1,000 ancestors. "They fear the sun because they have spent their lives worshipping the shadow. I want to take a moment to thank you for being here with us. The betrayal Alara faced is something no one should endure, but her rise is just beginning. If you're cheering for the underdog today, please take a second to leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? Tell me your story, I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our pack. We have so much more of Alara's journey to share, and we don't want you to miss a single heartbeat." The relationship I had with the Pack was a complex web of service and silent observation. I knew the secrets of the elders, who took extra meat during the winter, who whispered of mutiny in the dark. I had been the invisible thread holding the social fabric together, the one who listened when no one else would. My only true ally had been Bubba Blue Miller, the Pack's aging healer. He was the one who had watched me grow, his eyes often lingering on me with a strange, mournful knowing. "Child," Bubba called out from the crowd, his voice cracked with age and awe. "The prophecy of the White Moon. It wasn't a myth. Logan, you fool. You've rejected the very thing that was sent to save us." Logan's gaze snapped to the healer, then back to me. For a fleeting second the alpha mask cracked. I saw the boy I used to know, the one who once gave me a wildflower in the rain. He saw the marks on my arms from the heavy lifting, the pale scar on my neck from a rogue attack he had arrived too late to stop. He saw the woman he had relegated to the kitchens, now standing as a pillar of celestial fire. "I didn't know," Logan whispered so low only my heightened ears could catch it. "That's the problem, Logan," I said, my voice now layered with the resonant growl of my wolf. "You only look for power where it's loud. You never looked for it where it was loyal." The character foundation was set. I was no longer the girl seeking a mate's approval. I was a vessel for an ancient power that didn't care for pack politics. The stakes had shifted from a broken heart to a broken world. The Blood Moon Pack was built on a hierarchy of strength, and I was about to show them that their definition of strength was nothing more than a child's toy. As the silver light around me solidified, I felt the final barrier in my soul snap. My wolf wasn't just rising, she was taking the throne. And as I looked at the Alpha and his new Luna, I realized that the positive resolution I once dreamed of, a cottage and a quiet life, was gone. My victory would be written in the stars, and it would start with the destruction of the man who thought I was nothing. The air didn't just turn cold, it crystallized. Every wolf in the clearing felt the sudden violent shift in the atmosphere as my transformation reached its zenith. The low-ranking Omegas scrambled backward, their instincts screaming at them to find cover. while the high-ranking enforcers stood frozen, their hands hovering over silver-lined blades. "Elara, stand down!" Logan roared, his alpha command rippling through the air like a physical shockwave. Usually that voice would have brought me to my knees, forcing my head low in submission. But tonight the command hit my chest and shattered like glass against a mountain. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my skin shimmering with a pale, ethereal light. "Your voice has no power over the moon, Logan," I said, my own voice layered with a resonant, multitonal growl that made the very ground beneath the dais groan. The inciting incident wasn't just my transformation. It was the arrival of the Unbound. From the shadows of the surrounding pines, a dozen massive wolves emerged. They weren't from our pack. They were the Rogue Slayers, a nomadic group of outcasts who lived in the dead zones where no alpha dared to tread. At their head walked a man I had only seen in fever dreams, Atticus Finchvaughn. He was tall, scarred, and carried an aura of quiet, lethal authority that made Logan's posturing look like a child's tantrum. "The prophecy was right," Atticus said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He stepped into the light of the fire pits, his eyes locked on me with a terrifying intensity. "The White Wolf has risen. And she belongs to no pack." Sienna shrieked, clutching Logan's arm. "Logan, kill them. They're trespassing on sacred ground. Protect your Luna." Logan looked torn. His pride demanded he strike me down for defying his command, but his survival instinct was screaming at him that Atticus and his slayers were a threat he wasn't prepared for. He made his choice, the wrong one. He lunged toward me, his claws extending, his alpha strength fueled by the humiliation of being upstaged at his own ceremony. "You are mine to break, Elara," Logan yelled. Before he could reach me, the air between us ignited. A pillar of white fire erupted from the stone, throwing Logan back 10 feet. I didn't even raise a hand. My wolf, the ancient Leakin spirit, had created a barrier that no ordinary alpha could penetrate. In that moment of chaos, Atticus did something no one expected. He didn't attack Logan. He walked straight toward me through the heat and the light and dropped to one knee. He held out a heavy iron-bound collar, not for my neck but as a symbol. "The Unbound have waited 500 years for a queen," Atticus said, his head bowed. "The Blood Moon has rejected you. We offer you the world." The twist hit the crowd like a physical blow. The weak Omega was being offered the leadership of the most feared warriors in the wilderness. The ceremony that was meant to solidify Logan's alliance with Sienna's family was now a declaration of war. I looked at Logan, who was struggling to stand, his face a mask of shock and burgeoning jealousy. He saw Atticus, a man who was everything Logan pretended to be, offering me the respect he had denied me for years. The attraction I felt toward Atticus was immediate and visceral. It wasn't the submissive bond one had shared with Logan, but a pull of equals, a magnetic recognition of power. "She's not going anywhere," Logan screamed, the amber of his eyes turning a dark, muddy red. "She is a member of this pack. She is my property." "Property," I whispered, the word carrying across the clearing. I stepped off the dais, the white light following me like a shroud. I looked at the crowd, at the people who had laughed at my pain, and then back at the man who had traded my soul for a political merger. "I am the property of the moon," I declared. "And tonight the moon is leaving you." The challenge was set. The stakes had been raised from a simple rejection to a global power shift. If I left with Atticus, the Blood Moon Pack would lose their only protection against the coming darkness. If I stayed, I would be a prisoner in a golden cage. As I reached for Atticus's hand, the ground shook with a deafening crack. The ancient stone of the dais split in two, and from the darkness beneath, something else began to crawl out, something that had been waiting for the White Wolf to wake up. The ground didn't just shake, it groaned with the weight of 1,000 years of buried secrets. From the fissure in the sacred dais, a thick, suffocating mist began to pour, not white like mine but a bruised, oily purple. The scent of rot and ancient ozone filled the clearing, sending the pack into a frenzy of panicked howling. "The Shadow Stalkers," Atticus hissed, pulling a massive claymore from his back. "They've been waiting for the White Wolf to wake so they could feast on the light." The tension escalated instantly. The romantic ceremony had transformed into a battlefield. Logan, desperate to reclaim his shattered authority, lunged not at the monsters but at me. He was blinded by a toxic cocktail of hot jealousy and wounded pride. seeing me stand beside Atticus, a man who looked at me with reverence rather than pity, had snapped something in the Alpha's mind. "You're not leaving with him, Elara," Logan screamed, his shift into a massive black wolf completing in a spray of dark fur. He snapped his jaws inches from my face, his amber eyes clouded with madness. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Atticus stepped between us, the steel of his blade ringing as it met Logan's claws. The sparks from the collision illuminated the forest, casting long, dancing shadows. "She is not a prize to be won, little Alpha," Atticus growled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to calm the rising mist. "She is the catalyst. And if you touch her again, I will feed your heart to the trees." This is getting intense. We're seeing the true colors of everyone involved. The jealousy, the bravery, and the ancient darkness. I have to ask, what would you do if the person who rejected you suddenly tried to claim you again just because you found your power? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this high-stakes wolf shifter drama, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. Your support keeps the pack strong. For the next hour, the clearing became a chaotic dance of survival. The shadow stalkers, lanky eyeless creatures made of smoke and malice, tore through the edges of the pack. I felt every sting, every bite taken from my pack members as if it were happening to my own flesh. My wolf, the Great Leakin, was screaming for me to protect them despite their betrayal. "We have to help them, Atticus," I shouted over the roar of the wind. "They rejected you, Elara," Atticus countered, decapitating a shadow creature that tried to leap onto the dais. "They chose a Luna of politics over a Luna of soul. Let them find their own way." "No," I said, my voice resonating with a power that made the trees bow. "A queen doesn't rule because she is served. She rules because she protects." I stepped into the center of the fray, my white light expanding into a dome of celestial fire. Every shadow creature that touched the light dissolved into ash. I saw Sienna Starkvon cowering behind a fallen log, her alpha strength nowhere to be found. Beside her, her brother Forrest was swinging his silver dagger wildly, accidentally wounding his own sentries in his cowardice. The growth was visceral. I was no longer the girl who cleaned the floors. I was the sun in their darkest night. But as I pushed the light further, I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my side. I looked down. A silver arrow was protruding from my ribs. I looked toward the tree line. It wasn't a shadow creature who had fired. It was Logan's second-in-command, acting on a silent signal from Sienna. They didn't want a savior, they wanted a martyr. They wanted the power of the White Wolf, but they wanted it contained, dead and stuffed in a trophy room. "Elara!" Atticus roared, abandoning his post to catch me as I stumbled. The attraction between us flared. A mixture of protective fury from him and a desperate, rising hope from me. As he held me, his blood mixing with mine, the bond between us hummed. It wasn't a forced mate bond, it was a choice. But as my vision began to flicker, I saw Logan standing over us, his human form returning, his face a mask of twisted satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought that by wounding me he could bring me back down to his level. "If I can't have the White Wolf," Logan whispered, stepping over the bodies of his fallen soldiers, "then no one will." He reached for the arrow, intending to twist it, but the ground beneath us didn't just shake this time, it opened. The midpoint revelation was coming, and it was a truth that would challenge everything I believed about my lineage. The ground didn't just crack. It dissolved into a shimmering, ethereal lake of mercury. As I slumped against Atticus, the silver arrow in my ribs began to glow with a heat that defied the laws of nature. I expected the cold embrace of death, but instead, I felt a surge of ancient memory that shattered everything I believed about my Omega upbringing. "Elara, stay with me," Atticus roared, his hands pressing against the wound. His touch didn't just comfort me, it acted as a conduit. As our blood mingled, a vision exploded behind my eyes, not of a kitchen or a pack house, but of a celestial court where wolves wore the skins of gods. I saw a woman who looked exactly like me standing on this very dais 5 centuries ago. Beside her wasn't a wolf, but a man with eyes like the abyss. And standing across from them, holding the very same silver bow that had just fired at me, was the first alpha of the Blood Moon Pack. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The Blood Moon Pack didn't create the White Wolf. They stole her. The bond. I gasped, my voice echoing with the strength of the vision. "Logan, it was never a fated mate bond. It was a tether. A cage. I realized then that the humiliation I had felt all these years wasn't because I was weak. It was because the pack had been feeding off my dormant power for generations. Logan's ancestors had used a dark ritual to bind the Leakin spirit to their bloodline, ensuring their dominance while keeping the true queen in a state of perpetual wolfless amnesia. The rejection tonight wasn't Logan's choice. It was the bond breaking because my power had finally grown too massive for the tether to hold. He hadn't cast me aside. The universe had ripped me out of his parasitic grasp. "You knew," I whispered, looking up at Atticus. "You didn't come here to rescue a girl. You came to reclaim a weapon." Atticus's eyes softened, a flicker of genuine vulnerability breaking through his warrior's mask. "I came for the Queen Alara. But I found a woman who cared more for the people who hated her than for her own throne. That is the revelation I wasn't prepared for. This changes everything. The very foundation of the Blood Moon Pack is built on a lie. How would you feel if you found out your entire identity was a cage built by the people you trusted most? Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts on this massive twist. And if you're ready to see Alara take back her true destiny, make sure you've subscribed. We're heading into the darkest hour and you won't want to miss how she fights back. The stakes were now at their absolute peak. This wasn't just a pack dispute, it was a cosmic restoration. Logan, hearing my words, didn't look remorseful. He looked terrified. He knew the secret was out. If the pack realized their alpha's power was stolen, his reign would end in a bloodbath. "Kill her!" Logan screamed to his remaining sentries, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's possessed. She's a demon from the old world." But his men hesitated. They saw the way the silver arrow was melting, the liquid metal being absorbed into my skin rather than killing me. They saw the way the Shadow Stalkers had stopped attacking me and were now bowing, their smoky forms trembling in the presence of their true creator. The midpoint revelation had stripped away the lies. I wasn't a broken Omega. I was the source. Sienna, realizing her dream of being Luna was evaporating, grabbed the silver bow from the guard beside her. "If the tether is broken, then the source must be destroyed," she shrieked, aiming for my heart. But as she pulled the string, the light from my wound didn't just heal me, it detonated. A shock wave of pure white truth rippled outward, knocking everyone to the ground. In the silence that followed, I stood up, the arrow gone, my skin glowing like a star. I looked at Logan, then at the forest, then at Atticus. I felt the passion of my true nature rising, a determination that surpassed any romantic attraction. I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to rewrite the laws of the wild. But as I reached out to claim my power, the mist turned black. The Shadow Stalkers didn't just bow, they merged. A figure emerged from the oily purple haze. A figure that wore the face of the first Alpha, the man who had started the lie. The darkest hour was beginning, and it started with a betrayal that went deeper than Logan's rejection. The Mercury Lake beneath my feet didn't just shimmer. It turned into a void of absolute, soul-crushing black. As the shadowy figure of the first Alpha, the man who had stolen my lineage, stepped fully into the moonlight, the white fire that had been my shield flickered and died. The cold that rushed in wasn't just physical. It was an ancestral frost that reached into the very center of my spirit. "You think you are a queen?" the shadow hissed, its voice 1,000 dry leaves skittering over a grave. "You are nothing but a battery. A vessel we designed to be drained." With a flick of its smoke-wreathed hand, the shadow struck. A bolt of dark energy slammed into my chest, throwing me across the dais. I hit the stone with a sickening crack, the breath driven from my lungs. For the first time since my wolf rose, I felt small. I felt like the girl who scrubbed the floors again, discarded, broken, and utterly alone. Beside me, Atticus roared, his claymore swinging in a massive arc. But the shadow simply passed through his steel as if he were a ghost. With a casual backhand of dark mist, the shadow sent Atticus flying into the jagged tree-line. He didn't get up. I saw his hand twitch once in the dirt before he went still, the light in his eyes fading into the gloom. "Atticus." I choked out, my voice a ragged whisper. The separation was agonizing. The man who had seen my true worth was gone, and the pack I had tried to protect was now cowering in the dark, their eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of pity and relief. They weren't coming to help. They were waiting for the sacrifice to be over so they could return to their comfortable lies. This is the moment where the light truly fails. Have you ever felt like just as you found your strength, the world conspired to remind you of your lowest point? It's a pain that cuts deeper than any physical wound. If you're holding your breath for Elara right now, drop a heart in the comments to show her she's not alone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us. We need every voice in the pack to get through this darkest hour. Logan stepped forward then, his face illuminated by the sickly purple glow of the shadow. He didn't look like a leader, he looked like a scavenger. He saw me bleeding on the stone, my white fur receding, my human skin pale and shivering. "See, Elara?" Logan said, his voice dripping with a cruel, desperate triumph. "This is what happens when you try to be more than what you are. You're a freak. A glitch in the system. The shadow doesn't want a queen, it wants its property back." He knelt beside me, his fingers digging into the wound in my side where the silver arrow had been. The pain was white-hot, a visceral reminder of my vulnerability. "I can save you," he whispered into my ear, his breath smelling of copper and deceit. "Just submit. Give the shadow your spark and I'll let you live in the kitchens again. I'll even let you watch me and Sienna from the shadows. Isn't that what you always wanted? To be near me." The hopelessness was a suffocating weight. I looked at the broken dais, at the unconscious Atticus, and at the pack that had turned its back on me twice in one night. My wolf was silent, buried under layers of ancient, spectral chains. I felt the deepest fear of my soul coming true, that my rise had been a cruel joke, a brief moment of light before an eternity of darkness. Sienna laughed from the sidelines, her voice a shrill, piercing needle in the silence. "Finish it, Logan. Drain her. I want my wedding to be fueled by the blood of a goddess." The shadow loomed over me, its eyeless face inches from mine. I could feel my life force being pulled toward it, a slow, agonizing leak of starlight into the abyss. I closed my eyes, ready to let go, ready to return to the nothingness they told me I was. But then, in the deepest silence of my mind, I heard a sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a command. It was the sound of 1,000 omegas, the weak, the wolfless, the discarded, humming a song I had forgotten I knew. It was the song of the survivors. And I realized, the shadow didn't fear my power. It feared my choice. The shadow didn't just pull at my soul. It tried to convince me that the void was my home. But as the darkness pressed into my lungs, the humming of the weak grew into a roar. It wasn't the sound of a battery being drained. It was the sound of a dam breaking. "You call me a vessel," I whispered, my voice rattling against the stone of the dais. I forced my eyes open, the silver light returning not as a flicker, but as a searing white-hot laser. "But you forgot one thing. A vessel only holds what it chooses to contain." With a scream that tore through the ancestral frost, I reached out and grabbed the shadow's spectral wrist. The creature shrieked, a sound of tearing silk and breaking glass. It expected fear. It found a vacuum. I wasn't just resisting the drain. I was reversing it. I was pulling the stolen power of 5 centuries back into the source. The turning point wasn't a miracle from the moon. It was a realization of inner strength. I didn't need the pack's approval or Logan's bond. I was the moon's architect and I was about to demolish the house they had built on my back. "Elara." Atticus staggered out of the treeline, his face bloodied but his eyes burning with a renewed, fierce determination. He didn't run to save me, he ran to stand with me. He saw the shift in the air, the way the purple mist was being sucked into my palms, turning into pure, blinding white energy. "The seal is breaking." Atticus roared, his claymore glowing with the reflected light of my transformation. "Logan, your lies are being incinerated. This is it. The moment where the prey becomes the predator." Have you ever reached a point where you realized the only thing holding you back was your own belief in someone else's lies? That is the most powerful turning point a soul can experience. If you're feeling Elara's fire right now, smash that like button. Let's show the world that the weak are the ones who truly change the game. Subscribe now to see the final confrontation. The climax is coming and it's going to be legendary. Logan backed away, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He saw the silver veins spreading across the ground, repairing the cracks in the dais with liquid light. He saw his own alpha aura dimming, the stolen power returning to its rightful queen. "It's mine." Logan shrieked, lunging for the silver bow Sienna had dropped. "It's been ours for generations. You can't just take it back." "I'm not taking it back, Logan," I said, rising from the stone, my feet hovering inches above the Mercury Lake. My wolf didn't just emerge. She expanded, a massive, celestial lichen silhouette that towered over the entire clearing. I'm reclaiming the balance. I reached out a hand toward Atticus. As our fingers touched, the final realization clicked into place. He wasn't just a rogue leader. He was the descendant of the man who had tried to protect the White Wolf 5 centuries ago. Our souls didn't just recognize each other. They locked. It was a reunion of deep understanding, a romantic and spiritual bond that made the alpha-mate tether look like a cheap imitation. Together? Atticus asked, his voice steady even as the world around us began to dissolve into light. Together, I replied. The shadow of the first alpha let out one final world-shaking howl before it shattered into a million obsidian shards. The Shadow Stalkers vanished, their master defeated. But the real battle wasn't over. The Blood Moon Pack was still standing there, paralyzed by the truth. I turned my gaze toward the crowd. The Omegas were no longer bowing. They were standing tall, their own dormant spirits sparked by my light. The turning point had become a revolution. Logan Hunt Miller, I said, my voice echoing like thunder across the mountains. The ceremony is over. But the reckoning has just begun. I looked at Atticus, and in the shared look of courage and love, we prepared for the final push. We had the key to solving the conflict, not through more theft but through the absolute, unfiltered truth. The clearing was no longer a place of ritual. It was a theater of divine judgment. As the last fragments of the first Alpha's shadow dissolved into the dirt, the true weight of the moon's fury descended. I stood at the center of the dais, my white fur shimmering with a blinding, incandescent heat that turned the night into day. Logan Hunt Miller scrambled for the silver bow, his fingers clawing at the dirt. He was a man possessed by the ghost of a power that was never his. He notched an arrow, his muscles corded with a desperate, frantic strength. "I am the Alpha," he screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "The blood of the kings runs through me. You are nothing but a sacrifice that refused to die." He released the string. The silver arrow whistled through the air, aimed directly at my throat. But I didn't move. I didn't have to. Atticus Finchvaughn stepped forward, his claymore catching the moonlight as he deflected the projectile with a casual, rhythmic flick of his wrist. The arrow shattered against his steel, the shards falling like tinsel. "The kings you speak of were thieves, Logan," Atticus growled, his presence a towering wall of obsidian against Logan's fading amber light. I stepped past Atticus, my paws hitting the stone with the weight of a mountain. Every step I took toward Logan was a step toward the truth. I felt the collective heartbeat of the 1,000 wolves behind me, the Omegas, the sentries, the elders. They weren't looking at Logan anymore. They were looking at the sun. "You want to talk about strength, Logan?" I said, my voice resonating from the very earth beneath us. "Strength isn't what you steal. It's what you give. You stole my voice. You stole my mate bond. You stole the very soul of this pack to fuel your own vanity." I reached out, my clawed hand hovering inches from Logan's chest. I didn't strike him. I did something far more devastating. I reached into the spiritual tether that had bound our bloodlines for 5 centuries and I yanked. A scream of pure, ontological agony tore from Logan's throat. The stolen amber light, the parasitic power that had made his family alphas, flowed out of him in a torrent of golden smoke, rushing back into the center of my being. He shriveled before our eyes, his massive wolf form shrinking, his muscles atrophying until he was nothing more than a shivering, graying man in the dirt. This is the moment of ultimate justice. The thief has been stripped, and the queen has been crowned not by a crown, but by her own courage. Have you ever seen someone finally get what they deserved after years of taking from others? It is the most satisfying twist in any story. If you're cheering for Alara and Atticus right now, leave a victory in the comments. And make sure you've subscribed. The conclusion is just moments away and it's the most emotional payoff we've ever filmed. Sienna Starkvaughn tried to run, her silk dress catching on the jagged remains of the dais. She looked at her brother, Forrest, but he had already dropped his weapon, his face a mask of submissive terror. "Wait!" Sienna shrieked, looking back at me. "We can negotiate. My father has armies. We can make you a high queen. Just don't take it all." "I don't want your armies, Sienna," I said, my silver eyes locking onto hers. "I want your silence." With a wave of my hand, A burst of lunar energy sent her and Forest tumbling into the mist at the edge of the clearing. They weren't dead, but they were broken. Their status, their names, and their pride evaporated in the heat of my presence. I turned back to the Blood Moon Pack. They were all on their knees now. Not because I commanded it, but because the weight of the truth was too heavy to stand under. I saw the elders weeping, the realization of their ancestors' sins finally sinking in. I looked at Atticus. He stood beside me, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his eyes filled with a pride that made my heart swell. He didn't want to rule me. He wanted to run with me. In that moment, the most surprising twist occurred. I didn't feel the need for revenge. I felt a profound, echoing peace. The lie is dead, I declared, my voice carrying to the furthest reaches of the mountain range. The Blood Moon is no more. From this night on, we are the Pack of the Silver Dawn. And we do not serve an alpha. We serve the light. The climactic resolution wasn't just the defeat of a villain. It was the birth of a new world. The girl who had been cast aside was now the beacon. And as the sun began to peek over the jagged horizon, the white light of my wolf merged with the first rays of the morning, signaling the end of the long, dark night. The morning sun didn't just rise over the Blood Moon Mountains. It claimed them. 6 months had passed since the night the stone dais cracked and the lies of 5 centuries were incinerated in a column of lunar fire. I stood on the balcony of the high spire, but I wasn't looking at the training grounds or the bustling markets of the newly christened Silver Dawn Pack. I was watching the reflection of the man behind me in the glass. Atticus Finchvaughn walked into the room, his heavy tactical boots silent on the stone floor. He had traded his scarred claymore for the mantle of a guardian, but the fierce, protective light in his eyes remained unchanged. He didn't approach me as an alpha approaching a mate. He approached me as a partner approaching his equal. "The emissaries from the northern alphas have arrived, Alara," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble that sent a spark of electricity through my soul. "They've seen the reports. They know the wolfless girl is gone and a queen has taken her place. They're here to sign the Treaty of the Sun." I turned, my white silk robes catching the golden light. I felt the steady, powerful thrum of my wolf, the first Leekin, resting peacefully within me. She wasn't a burden or a battery anymore, she was my breath. I had settled the romantic subplot not with a forced bond, but with the quiet daily choice to build a life with the man who had stood by me when I had nothing. "Let them wait another moment, Atticus," I said, a soft, genuine smile touching my lips. "The world won't end if they have to contemplate their own reflection for a few minutes longer." The transformation of the pack was complete. I had dismantled the cruel hierarchy that had once kept me in the kitchens. The Omegas were now our scholars and healers, their unique spirits recognized as the backbone of our strength. I no longer felt the need for the validation I had once craved from Logan. When I saw him occasionally, now a graying, powerless man working the very gardens I used to scrub, I felt only a distant, fading pity. He had been a prisoner of his own stolen power, and in stripping it, I had given him the only true life he'd ever known. "I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us on this 40-minute journey of betrayal, magic, and ultimate rebirth." Seeing Alara rise from the ashes of a public rejection to become the beacon for an entire world reminds us that our true power doesn't come from who chooses us, but from who we choose to be. What was your favorite moment? Was it the reveal of the first Leekin or the final stand against the shadow? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and join our Silver Dawn. We have so many more emotional adventures waiting for you every single week. "Sienna and Forest have requested a transfer to the Southern Wastes," Atticus added, walking over to join me at the edge of the balcony. "They say the light here is too bright for them." I nodded, leaning my head against his shoulder. The silence between us was full, a rich tapestry of shared battles and new beginnings. I had tied up every loose end, from the healing of Bubba Blue Miller to the restoration of the ancient Leekin records. The darkness wasn't gone from the world, but it no longer had a foothold in our hearts. "You know," I whispered, my hand finding his, "I used to think that being chosen by an alpha was the only way I could ever be whole. I thought if I didn't have that bond, I was just a shadow." Atticus looked down at me, his eyes searching mine with a depth that made the old mate tether look like a child's toy. And now, I said, my voice echoing with a peace that surpassed all understanding, "I realize that the moon doesn't need a pack to shine. It just needs to be brave enough to face the night. As the two of us walked down the spire together, heading toward a future built on truth and unyielding courage, the camera lingered on the reclaimed dais below. There, etched into the new stone in silver ink, were the words that would guide us for generations. The night meant to break her was the morning she began. The screen faded to a brilliant, shimmering silver, leaving the viewers with a sense of triumph, justice, and the warmth of a sun that would never set on the silver dawn. Love hadn't just saved the girl had saved the world.